there are two genes that are known. One's on chromosome 17. This is called BRCA1. It raises the risk of breast cancer to a very high level. And there is another gene on chromosome 13, which is called BRCA2, which also raises the risk of breast and ovarian cancer. So the fault in the gene, so that's the fault in the gene, and in the fault in the gene, in the general population, the lifetime risk, what is the chance that you're going to get breast cancer if you have a member of the general population? The chance is 12%. But if you have inherited a mutation in this particular gene that's called BRCA1, your chance increases by about 5-fold, from 12% to about 60%. And if you have a mutant BRCA2, mutation in the BRCA2, your risk increases by about 4-fold, from 12% to about 45%. So essentially, these are very high-risk genes for breast cancer, and that's the reason why. And Angelina actually inherited a mutant BRCA1, so she felt that she was going to get breast cancer, and she just removed the organs that get afflicted with this kind of cancer. Mutations in BRCA1 and BRCA2 also increases the risk of ovarian cancer. Remember, her mother didn't get breast cancer, her mother got ovarian cancer at a relatively young age of 56. BRCA1 also increases the risk of ovarian cancer by to 39%, and BRCA2 increases the risk of ovarian cancer to about 15%. So both of these genes together increase the risk of both breast and ovarian cancer many-fold. And that's what Angelina did. I'm not going to give you any prize if you guess what Angelina did next. And this is what she did next. She got rid of her ovaries and fallopian tubes. So over a period of time, because BRCA1 and BRCA2, both of these genes, are actually involved in both breast and ovarian cancer, she first got rid of her breast and then she got rid of her ovaries. So essentially she got rid of many organs that probably would have gotten malignant at some point of time in her lives, and so she wanted to remain disease-free, and that's the reason why she removed these different organs from her body. There are two kinds of genes. There are two classes of genes that precipitate cancer. One class of gene is called tumor suppressors. So as the name suggests, tumor suppressors, it's suppressing cancer. These genes are expressed all the time. They are expressed all the time, and these are good genes that need to be expressed. Sometimes when there is a change in the DNA of that particular gene, it gets shut off. Yeah, so it either produces a faulty protein or gets shut off. And once it gets shut off, then it doesn't perform its normal function, which is to suppress tumors. And then what happens is that tumors become evident in the body when there is a mutation or a change in the DNA that corresponds to a tumor suppressor gene. There is so this is what I said. There is another class of genes that are called oncogenes. These genes are usually asleep. And because of a DNA change, these genes wake up, and when they wake up, they produce a dangerous kind of protein or a set of dangerous kinds of proteins that eventually turns a cell malignant. So we must remember that there are two kinds of proteins, two kinds of genes. One's called a tumor suppressor, the other is called an oncogene. Tumor suppressor is almost always awake, and some change in the DNA puts it to sleep. Oncogenes are usually asleep. Some change in the DNA wakes them up. In either case, the result is disastrous, and the disaster that happens is that it precipitates cancer. We'll just remember this. Like I said, only about 10% of any cancer is due to inheritance of a faulty mutant gene. This is what is passed on. Most of these cancers are actually as a result of the exposures that happens to various chemicals and viruses and other kinds of organisms during our life course. I want to tell you a few facts. Worldwide, 1.6 million new cases of breast cancer are diagnosed each year, leading to over 500,000 deaths. So breast cancer is not something that is to be taken lightly. 40 years ago, the 5-year survival rate following diagnosis of breast cancer was 50%. Today, that figure stands at 80%, which means that with the same, when the treatment is done for breast cancer, the chance of surviving for 5 more years after treatment has increased by 30%. But how did it happen? In about 20% of breast cancers, the cells make too much of a protein known as HER2. HER2 is Herceptin 2. It does something. So this is a protein that is produced by a gene. The gene is also called HER2. These cancers tend to be aggressive and fast growing. This happens in 20% of breast cancers. So the remaining 80% of breast cancers don't make too much of a protein called HER2, but we also know what the other remaining 80% of cancers, 80% of breast cancers do, and I'm not going to tell you that part of the story. So my point is to be able to tell you certain stories so that I make the point that genomics is helpful for precision medicine. So I'm going to restrict my attention to these 20% of breast cancers, breast cancers in which the cells make too much of a protein that's known as HER2. HER2 is here. It's on chromosome 17, just as BRCA1. Chromosome 17, Q is the long arm of chromosome 17, so it's in the long arm of chromosome 17. It's called a proto-oncogene, but the names don't matter. Usually one has 2 copies, every woman has 2 copies, but up to 4 may be okay. So if you have more number of copies, you produce more protein. So up to 4 is okay. But if you overproduce, so HER2, it's also called the human epidermal growth factor receptor. The protein is expressed in the cell's outer surface. It receives signals from the surrounding environment that trigger cell to grow and survive. And remember, cancer is a process by which the cells grow and grow and grow. They don't actually stop growing. And too much of overgrowth is one hallmark of cancer. And when you have many copies of HER2, this gene, there is more protein production. The more protein production leads to a receipt of an overload of growth signals. So this is the signals from outside of the cell are coming to inside of the cell. There is an overload of growth signals that trigger the growth and divide, and it becomes uncontrollable growth, and that leads to tumor formation. So if you have HER2 overproduction, it eventually leads to tumor progression. So this is what was discovered. And if you look at HER2, there are, as I said, up to 4 copies may be okay. But if you have 5 or more copies, then that's called an amplified HER2. And if you have HER2 amplification, then essentially what you have is that you have a lower disease-free survival after treatment. If you don't know how to read this graph, this is what it is. On the x-axis, the number of months after treatment, the number of months the patient survives, and on the y-axis, the chance of survival, the probability of survival. So if what you see is that, for example, if you have 5 or more copies of HER2, the chance that you will survive for 3 years, 36 months, is only about 40% if you have 5 or more copies. But if you do not have extra copies, then the chance of survival is close to 85% for 3 years. Yeah. So there is, for every time point after treatment, if you have additional copies, then you're worse off than if you did not have additional copies. So understanding that HER2 is or is not overexpressed helps in predicting how long a patient is going to survive. So HER2 positive breast cancers, the drug that has been found. So one way to do it is to be able to block the production of the protein, knowing that you have many extra copies and it's going to produce more protein. If you can from the outside inhibit the production of that protein or stop the function of the protein, then at least you can protect this individual from the risk of overproduction of that particular protein that is going to lead to the cell growing and growing and growing. So this HER2 positive breast cancers, the drug is known as Herceptin, that dramatically reduces the risk of cancer coming back. Herceptin has fewer intermediate side effects. Chemotherapy has lots of side effects. Chemotherapy is a cellular poison. It essentially stops division of cells, and it stops fast dividing cells more rapidly than slow dividing cells. Usually our hair follicles grow at a very high rate, and so as many of you may know, that when there is chemotherapy, the first signs of chemotherapy is that you lose hair. And the reason why you lose hair is because these chemotherapy agents have huge side effects and works on fast-growing, fast-dividing cells, and that's the reason there is nausea and hair loss. Herceptin was essentially blocks. It's designed to attach itself to HER2, and because it attaches itself to HER2 protein production, overproduction of that protein is contained. So that's what Herceptin does, and this understanding that about 20% of women who have breast cancer produces an additional amount of this particular protein, and the corresponding antibody that attaches itself to the protein and helps in stopping the overgrowth of these cells. That's a hallmark of cancer. So this understanding has actually saved lives of women. So the understanding of gene expression, the understanding of which particular proteins are overexpressed in cells, the understanding of the function of those proteins has helped find new drugs and has helped save lives of women. And this is by tailoring drugs more precisely using information on their genomes. And the information on the genome that we have used for treatment is the HER2, Herceptin 2 is the HER2 overexpression that is obliterated by this particular drug called Herceptin. I want to turn to children now. So one, I hope that I've been able to impress upon you that it is helpful. It has helped women. Now I want to show you how genomics has helped childhood cancers. So if you look at leukemia, these are cancer cells, and these disc-shaped ones are the red blood cells. These are white blood cells. Leukemia starts in the organs that make blood, namely bone marrow and the lymphatic system. There are red blood cells that carry oxygen, and there are white blood cells that fight infection. So these are the white blood cells that these white blood cells that of course has become cancerous. The white blood cells are of three kinds: granulocytes, monocytes, and lymphocytes. The granulocytes kill bacteria. By and large, I'm simplifying. They also do many other things, but essentially, in the main, they kill bacteria. Monocytes defend against various other kinds of pathogens, and lymphocytes, and there are two kinds of lymphocytes, one that kills viruses called T lymphocytes, and one that produce antibodies that help again defend ourselves, and that's called B lymphocytes. So if you look at children with leukemia, leukemia again is heterogeneous. There are B-cell leukemia, there's B-cell leukemia of various kinds and so on. I'm not going to get into the detail, but look at what has happened, and this is amazingly dramatic. 1960, only 4% of children suffering from leukemia survived. Today, 2014, 92% of children suffering from leukemia survive. Of course, this leukemia is of a particular kind called Philadelphia chromosome positive, and I will explain what Philadelphia chromosome is. The name is named Philadelphia. Philadelphia, as you know, is the name of a city in the United States, and this particular chromosome type is called Philadelphia chromosome, primarily because the discovery was made in University of Pennsylvania, which is located in the city of Philadelphia. But the point that I want to make is that in 1960, in about less than 50 years, from 4% of the children surviving from leukemia, the survival rate has gone to 92%. And this could not have happened without an understanding, a deep understanding of what happens at the genetic level, at the cellular level. So let me tell you that story. So in the Philadelphia chromosome, or the Philadelphia, the phenomenon is that, first of all, there is a normal chromosome 9 and there is a normal chromosome 22. Normal chromosome 9 has what's called a gene called ADL. Doesn't matter what, this is an acronym, doesn't matter what the name of the gene is, let's just call it ADL. And there is another gene on chromosome, the long arm of chromosome 22 called BCR. So this is called BCR and this is called ABL. What happens is that in some of these patients who have leukemia, that are called Philadelphia positive leukemia, Philadelphia chromosome positive leukemia, a portion of this goes and translocates to another place. So this is what happens, that you get this particular BCR and there is a fusion. So it gets struck out from here, it gets struck out from here, and you get a changed chromosome 22. Remember, BCR is in chromosome 22, so the ABL goes and joins itself to the BCR, and you get what's called a fusion chromosome or a translocated chromosome called BCR-ABL. As a result of this translocation, the one part of a gene going and getting itself stuck to another chromosome, this particular translocation leads to a production of a rogue protein, and that rogue protein causes cancer. This understanding that there was this kind of a translocation, and this kind of a translocation started producing a protein that was a faulty protein that leads to cancer, came from this lady whose name is Janet Rowley. She worked at the University of Chicago. She died a few years ago in 2013 at the age of 88 years. So this is the first understanding that there is this chromosomal translocation that can actually cause cancer. And she brought this understanding to the forefront, and as a result of understanding, so many lives are being saved. So how are we saving these lives? This understanding helped us help companies get hold of a drug called imatinib, and essentially what this imatinib does is very similar to what I told you about Herceptin. It just essentially completely competitively binds to the site and inhibits the overproduction of that rogue protein. So the idea is to be able to understand what is causing cancer, and that understanding is coming from the genomic analysis of the cells in the tumor tissue. And once you get that understanding, then you know what to block or what to inhibit, and that's how these various kinds of drugs are coming to the market. And once this drug comes to the market, you've seen what happens. From 4% of children being surviving from Philadelphia positive leukemia to 92% in less than 50 years. And this understanding, this public health impact could not have happened without an understanding of the genetic defect that underlies this kind of leukemia. So understanding of genomic facts is actually saving lives of children. My last part, saving lives of men. So I've talked about women, I've talked about children, and I'm talking about now spend the rest of my talk talking about men. I'm going to tell you two stories. The story number one, here is a patient, and as you can see that this patient, well, you can't see it unless I tell you. So each dot in this patient, so this is a whole body scan. Each dot in this patient is a tumor. So what you see is that this particular individual has tumor or cancer that is spread all over the body. Good. So this patient is treated, and this is what happens in 15 days at a particular dose of that medication. So what you see is that, again, 15 days later, a whole body scan has actually removed all of the tumors from this individual's body. 15 days at a particular dose. Isn't that amazing? And this is a true story. I'm not making up this story. This is a true story, and this is what happened. But there was also another unfortunate individual who started with exactly the same. Prior to treatment, the body looked exactly the same, and after 15 days of treatment at the same dosage that this individual got, this individual remained at exactly the same state. So the question that we're asking is, why is there a happy face here and why is there a sad face here? Why is it that the same treatment worked for this individual and did not work for this individual? We need to get to that understanding, and once we get that understanding, we will be able to make drugs more precise, and this is what precision medicine is all about. So let's see what happened to these individuals. My story number two, I'll come back to story number one. My story number two is a conversation that I have overheard in the corridors of a hospital here, not too far from here, and this is again a real story. And I'm a personal witness to this conversation. The conversation is taking place between a doctor, a cancer surgeon, and the wife of a patient, and the patient has been admitted to the hospital with lung carcinoma, with lung cancer. And this is the conversation, and this is true. The doctor is saying, well, the patient has, never mind what NSCLC is, don't worry about it, last LC is lung cancer. For those of you who are interested, this is non-small cell lung carcinoma. So the patient has lung cancer, I need to put him on chemotherapy. Immediately the wife's tentacles go up. First of all, that her husband has cancer, and secondly, she's heard that chemotherapy has lots of side effects. The husband won't be able to eat. She has to come to the hospital every day. She lives in Salt Lake, and this is happening in Thakurpukur, a long way to go. And so the next question that the wife asked the doctor, can the chemotherapy be done at home? Because if the chemotherapy can be done at home, then she doesn't have to travel to the hospital, and if the husband is at home, she can take better care of her husband. The immediate reaction of the doctor was, no, you can't do that. Then he pauses and says, wait a minute, let's check out his EGFR mutation status. EGFR is a gene standing for epidermal growth factor receptor. And this particular mutation, this particular gene gets mutated, and if there is mutation, something happens. If there is no mutation, something happens. Mutation is a change in the DNA. So let's check out his EGFR mutation status, and then he says, if it turns out that he has EGFR mutations, if there are changes in this particular gene in the DNA, in the cells of the tumor tissue, then you can take him home and administer chemotherapy orally. Yeah? So usually chemotherapy is injectable. When it's injectable, it has to be done in the hospital, but if it's oral, you can take him home and administer chemotherapy orally. I'll again come back to this story at the end. So this is fault in the gene. In cancers, most of these faults happen during the life course of a patient, as I've told you. And even though these changes are not heritable, meaning that they are not passed on from one generation to another, cancer is a disease of the genome because it's taking place in the DNA of the cells in the tumor tissue. If you want to look at evolution of a cancer genome, cancer usually involves multiple mutations. So here is a straight set of cells. Let's say that inside the oral cavity it's called the epithelium, and when you're born with a very nicely stacked set of cells. Each cell looks exactly the same. They may or may not look exactly the same. Some cells may have certain changes, but they by and large look exactly the same. And then as life course goes on, you start chewing tobacco, you stop brushing your teeth or do something to the oral cavity, and then these changes, DNA changes take place. Most of these changes are taking place in the body. Even as I'm giving this talk, there are mutations happening in cells of my body, and they are usually innocuous. They don't cause any damage to the human body. So these mutations are happening all the time in the background. And so more mutations are happening. They just don't cause any harm. Sometimes these mutations give a slight growth advantage to the cell. Remember, I'm going to talk about growth advantage because after all, the hallmark of cancer is huge cellular growth. It becomes a big lump, right? So it's huge cellular growth. So some of these mutations then will give a small kink or a bump. So that's where a second mutation is arisen, and this particular cell, instead of dividing into two daughter cells, has divided into multiple daughter cells, and it's become what's called a clone of cells. Similarly, the second mutation gave rise to another clone. But again, these kinks and bumps are happening all the time in our body. We don't recognize them. They happen constantly, but they are harmless, and therefore we don't care about them. And then on the top of this, more mutations take place. So here is another mutation that took place. But this mutation happens to be very different in its nature compared to the other mutations, the black and white mutations. What does this mutation do? This mutation gives a huge growth advantage to this particular cell where it has arisen. And then this mutation